Welcome to our deep dive into the Cold War era, a period of intense political rivalry that profoundly shaped the world. Today, we'll explore how the Cold War impacted the United States and its southern neighbors in Latin America. From covert operations to regime changes, we'll uncover how the U.S. sought to exert its influence in the region and the lasting effects of its actions. Join us as we navigate this complex and often controversial chapter in history. The Cold War, spanning from the mid-20th century until the early 1990s, was marked by a global struggle between the United States and the Soviet Union. This period influenced both domestic and foreign policies worldwide, particularly in the Western Hemisphere. The United States viewed Latin America as a crucial region for its influence, leading to significant involvement in its internal conflicts. This involvement varied across different administrations, but remained a constant throughout the Cold War. The official U.S. policy during this period was encapsulated in the Truman Doctrine, announced by President Harry Truman in 1946. This doctrine justified increased U.S. intervention in Latin America, framing it as a defense of freedom and democracy against the spread of communism. Truman emphasized that the world is not static and the status quo is not sacred, underscoring the need for the U.S. to actively support free nations against coercion and political infiltration. The Truman Doctrine and U.S. intervention. The Truman Doctrine marked the beginning of a more active U.S. role in Latin American politics and economics. This policy was rooted in the belief that Latin America needed U.S. protection and guidance, reflecting a paternalistic attitude that viewed the region as in need of American leadership. The doctrine provided the ideological justification for U.S. meddling and regime-changing actions, deemed necessary to counter Soviet influence. The 1950s saw an escalation in U.S. efforts to combat Soviet influence globally, with a particular focus on Latin America. The Eisenhower administration intensified these efforts, employing more direct and ethically questionable methods such as covert operations and military support. A pivotal moment came in 1954 when a committee tasked by Eisenhower to study the CIA recommended a more aggressive stance. The committee concluded that we are facing an implacable enemy whose avowed objective is world domination, by whatever means and at whatever cost, advocating for espionage, subversion, and sabotage as essential tools for U.S. survival. Covert operations and espionage. The U.S.'s approach to countering Soviet influence often involved covert operations, primarily led by the CIA. These operations aimed to undermine communist movements and support pro-U.S. regimes, sometimes through morally and legally dubious means. The 1960s and 1970s were particularly active periods for such interventions, with the U.S. employing a variety of tactics to achieve its objectives. One of the most infamous cases was the CIA's involvement in assassination plots. The Senate Church Committee, tasked with investigating U.S. actions in the Third World, revealed that the CIA was implicated in numerous assassination attempts. In Latin America, two cases stood out: Cuba's President Fidel Castro and Chile's General René Schneider. The plots against Castro were especially extensive, involving multiple attempts over several years. According to the Church Committee's report, U.S. government personnel plotted to kill Castro from 1960 to 1965, using American underworld figures and anti-Castro Cubans, who were provided with encouragement and material support by the U.S. Specific cases of U.S. intervention. Let's delve deeper into specific cases of U.S. intervention in Latin America during the Cold War. The attempts to assassinate Fidel Castro are perhaps the most well-known example. The sheer number of plots and the involvement of various actors highlight the lengths to which the U.S. was willing to go to eliminate a communist leader in its hemisphere. These efforts included everything from poisoned cigars to exploding seashells, demonstrating a blend of creativity and desperation. In Chile, the U.S. played a significant role in the political landscape, particularly during the 1970 presidential election. The U.S. opposed the candidacy of Salvador Allende, a Marxist, fearing that his election would strengthen Soviet influence in the region. To prevent Allende's victory, the CIA funded opposition parties and disseminated propaganda. When Allende won, the U.S. continued to undermine his government, culminating in support for the military coup led by General Augusto Pinochet in 1973. This coup resulted in Allende's death and the establishment of a brutal military dictatorship. Another notable case is the U.S. involvement in Guatemala. In 1954, the CIA orchestrated a coup to overthrow the democratically elected President Jacobo Arbenz, who had initiated land reforms that threatened U.S. business interests. The coup installed a military regime that reversed Arbenz's reforms and led to decades of political instability and violence in Guatemala. The broader impact on Latin America: the U.S. interventions in Latin America during the Cold War had far-reaching consequences for the region. These actions often destabilized countries, leading to prolonged periods of violence, repression, and economic hardship. The support for military dictatorships and authoritarian regimes undermined democratic institutions and human rights, leaving a legacy of distrust and resentment towards the U.S. The belief in racial superiority and the perceived responsibility to protect the region allowed the U.S. to justify its actions, often with dire consequences for Latin American societies. The use of military force, espionage, and mercenaries became common tactics in the name of anti-communism, clouding the ethical and moral judgment of American administrations. In the long term, these interventions have had lasting impacts on the political and social landscapes of Latin American countries. The legacy of U.S. involvement can be seen in the continued struggles for democracy, human rights, and economic development across the region. Additionally, the Cold War era set a precedent for U.S. foreign policy, influencing how the U.S. engages with other parts of the world to this day. Lessons from the Cold War era. Reflecting on the Cold War period, it is essential to consider the lessons learned from this tumultuous time. The aggressive tactics employed by the U.S. often had unintended and destructive consequences, highlighting the need for more ethical and sustainable approaches to foreign policy. The pursuit of geopolitical goals should not come at the expense of human rights and democratic principles. One key lesson is the importance of respecting national sovereignty and supporting democratic processes. Interventions that undermine these principles can lead to long-term instability and resentment. Additionally, fostering positive relationships based on mutual respect and cooperation is more likely to yield sustainable and beneficial outcomes for all parties involved. The Cold War also underscores the dangers of viewing the world through a binary lens of us versus them. This mentality can lead to excessive paranoia and justify actions that violate international norms and human rights. The dynamics between nationalism and multiculturalism, the influence of the Truman Doctrine, and the extensive use of covert operations all played a significant role in shaping this period. As we reflect on this history, it is crucial to learn from the past to build a more just and peaceful future. Thank you for joining us in this exploration of the Cold War's impact on Latin America. If you found this video insightful, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and let us know in the comments what lessons you think we can learn from this period. Don't forget to subscribe for more in-depth analyses of important historical events. See you in the next video.